Now, first off, okay, I am not a scientist, okay? I do not like talking about scientific stuff because essentially you are relying on numbers and data that have been handed down to you from scientists. And so there is an element of trust involved, and I don't trust them. So keep that in mind. So now to this theory, which ties into the jabs, it ties into the mark of the beast. It also ties into the Queen, okay? Now this theory is a curious one, and I want you out there to chime in on this because I'm not 100% sold on it. There is not a lot of evidence to back it up. There is something, but again, you know, I'm no expert on it. So let us know in the comments what you think. Now this theory comes from a book from 2013 called A Beautiful Delusion, The Coming Antichrist by William Kinney. So this book is now 9 years old. I haven't read it yet. I haven't had the time. I've looked through it quickly, but I just wanted to run this theory he has in it by you lot and see what you think. See if you can debunk it, okay? In the book he says the end of days will be upon us when they start jabbing everyone, okay? This is back in 2013. And that what they are ultimately trying to do is alter everyone's DNA. It's all linked to changing what he says is God's original creation and creating a counterfeit, an artificial version of man, okay? He says here in the book that in the year 2000, and this is what the theory rests upon, okay? He says in the year 2000, he read an interview in Reader's Digest magazine, an interview with a certain Dr. Francis Crick. Now, who is Dr. Francis Crick? He is the guy who is said to have discovered DNA in 1953. It is said he discovered the double helix structure of DNA in 1953, Dr. Francis Crick. Anyway, it says in his book, he says in this interview with Reader's Digest, it says at the time the Human Genome Project was underway, Dr. Crick was asked about how many genes they had identified so far. How many genes in one person's DNA? He answered 140,000. And we expect to find 4,000 more. So this is in the year 2000. So basically what he says here is that the man who discovered DNA and the double helix said in an interview that humans are made up of, he reckons, 144,000 genes. Okay? I mean, if we can believe this interview. This is a very specific number. Now this is a famous number. This number is mentioned in the Bible many times. In the book of Revelations, 144,000 people. Many people believe that in the Bible this is the number of people who will be saved, or that number is mentioned with those that are sealed with God, the pure ones, while all the others will perish. For example, it says here, then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. It says in another part, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Okay, so you get the idea. 144,000. And the book of Revelations is quite significant. It's those that are saved. They are called virgins in another part. Maybe that means those who haven't been penetrated by an injection. Maybe. Who knows? Now, like I said, Bible scholars have presumed that this is 144,000 people, like as in a number of people. But what this guy theorizes in his book is that this 144,000 is an individual's number of genes, okay? Their original genetic code that make up the DNA of an individual person, okay? So everyone with 144,000 genes, that's their original DNA gene count. Someone who hasn't had his DNA tampered with, okay, will have 144,000 genetic count, okay? That's the theory this guy is going on. The only problem, okay, with this theory is this interview in the Reader's Digest I don't know where it is. I haven't been able to locate it. Not able to find this interview with Dr. Crick, the discoverer of DNA and the double helix. So I can't verify it. Now, if anybody knows where this interview can be found, this interview in the Reader's Digest, let us know. Now, secondly, if you look at scientists today, they claim that people have 20,000 to 25,000 genes. And they're claiming that what was said before in the past is now incorrect. They state that an individual's DNA is made up of 20 to 25,000 genes. They state that only 20 years ago, they thought it was 100,000 plus genes, but that they were wrong. That was a mistake, and that it was because they were counting protein cells or something. And really, sorry, we made a mistake. It's now 20,000. This sounds very odd to me, okay? I mean, you have to look at this Dr. Crick in an interview in 2000, apparently stating that he has been counting genes and studying this for the last 50 years after he discovered it, and reckons it's 144,000 genes that make up a human's DNA. And then he dies 4 years later in 2004. And then after that, suddenly these new scientists come in and say, oh no, all of that was completely wrong. It's actually 20,000. Okay? So you have to think to yourself, if they were wrong before, how do we know they are not wrong now? Or alternatively, is it actually really 144,000 and they're covering it up? They don't want people to know this. I don't trust anything they say. I'm of the opinion that we should forget everything we have been told and look at everything with a very skeptical eye these days. Okay? Now there's more to this, but before we get into it, if we see, look at this peer-reviewed scientific study from 2010. Okay, so that's only 12 years ago, called The Characterization of 20 Sequenced Human Genomes. It states here, we also show that the number of novel single nucleotide variants, SNVs, discovered per genome seems to stabilize at about 144,000 new variants per genome. Now, I'm no scientist, okay, but here we see the mention of 144,000. Very specific number in a peer-reviewed scientific abstract, they call them, from 2010. Okay? It says a single nucleotide variant is a gene variation. Okay? An SNV is a gene variation. So it says the number of gene variations per genome, and the genome is, as it says here, a genome is simply the sum total of an organism's DNA. So again, it says the number of gene variations per genome, the sum total of an organism's DNA, seems to stabilize, which means it reaches its limit at 144,000 per genome. The genome that contains all genetic information of an organism. So this sounds like it ties in with what Dr. Crick in his interview said. Now, I could be wrong here, as I'm not a scientist or experienced in this in any way, but it's interesting that 144,000, that number is mentioned. Now, why is this important? And what has this got to do with the mark of the beast? Okay, so now we're going to get onto the meat and potato. If we take this theory of a person's individual gene count being 144,000, we've got the double helix, okay? The double helix of the DNA, the two strands, yeah? One strand of genes from the mother and one from the father, okay? 72,000 each, combining to make 144,000 genes. So we have two strands of DNA, 72,000 per strand of DNA, totaling 144,000 genes. That's the original genetic code of man, okay? Now, what if they added a third strand to everyone's DNA? That third strand would also have to be 72,000 genes. So you would have 72,000 plus 72,000 plus 72,000, which would add up the total genetic code of a man and make it 216,000 in total, with three strands of DNA, a triple helix, as opposed to the 140,000 genes in the double helix. Now, if you take the mark of the beast, as it says in the Bible, it says in the Bible, "Here is wisdom, let him have understanding, count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 600, 66." Okay, it's very particular about that. Okay, so it says the number is 600. Then it says 60. A score is 20. So that is 3 20s, which is 60. And then number 6. So we have 600, 60 and 6. Now, if you multiply 600 by 60 by 6, you multiply those numbers as they are exactly said in the Bible, and the answer is 216,000, the exact same number of the triple helix, of what would happen if they added a third strand to your DNA and made it a triple helix. You'd have 216,000, which just so happens to be 600 by 60 by 60, if you multiply them numbers as said in the Bible, stated as the mark of the beast. And that is, of course, if there is 72,000 genes per strand, which of course these scientists say isn't the case now, but they did 20 years ago. Are you following me? Is this what we are seeing now with all of these jabs? Are people having their DNA altered so they end up with a third strand of DNA, a triple helix, which is the number of the mark of the beast, because it's a counterfeit of the original genetic code from the Creator, from God, which is 144,000, a number which is mentioned in the Bible time and time again at the end of days that you need to have to be saved. They have been talking about triple helixes for a long time in science. Here is the New Scientist magazine in 1991. Here we see Science, a triple helix to cripple viruses, a technique to insert a third strand of DNA into the double helix of specific genes could be used to throw a spanner into the works of the cell's machinery. The American scientists who developed this triple helix or triple X technique hope to eventually cripple viruses in this way. And here we see a Microsoft video talking about it back in 2016.
Imagine a world where we can do computation inside living cells.
The problem that we're trying to solve is really trying to have a more sophisticated diagnosis that can happen automatically inside cells.
Imagine a biological computer that operates inside a living cell. So for example, it could be used to determine whether a cell is cancerous, and if so, then trigger the death of the cell.
So here we're talking about little molecular systems that you can, work that run in a test tube or maybe even in a live cell, so they're really small. The type of work that they're doing is essentially they're trying to sense, analyze and control molecular information.
In this project, we're trying to use DNA as a programmable material.
DNA is highly programmable, just like a computer, and we can program a whole range of complex behaviors using DNA molecules.
So we're taking advantage of a phenomenon called DNA strand displacement.
So DNA strand displacement is essentially a competitive hybridization reaction. So it's two strands of DNA that come together, and as they bind to one another, a third strand that was initially bound is kicked off. One issue with any biology research or biomolecular research is that it's always sort of a cycle of trial and error. You test it, it doesn't work, so you go back to the drawing board and you do that over and over again. And it's a slow cycle because doing experiments just is hard and it takes a lot of time.
So look, again, I'm no scientist, okay? This is open for debate. I'm not saying that this is a closed case, even if it's mentioned in the title, but it's very interesting, isn't it? Then also, on top of all of that, we've got the Queen. You remember that Jubilee nonsense back in June when she lit up the tree of trees, they called it? Basically, it looks like the tree of knowledge or the tree of life. And when she lit it up, as you can see here, what many people said at the time, it looks like she pressed a button on a globe and that set off a lit up pattern which initially looks like a double helix pattern that went along the ground to the tree. A ceremony a symbolic ceremony, no less. But if you look at it and the way the lights form along the ground, you can see that it is a triple helix being lit up and going to the tree of life. All right? This is a symbolic ceremony. What are they trying to show people? What are they telling you? That they are changing the people of the world's DNA. They are adding a third DNA strand. You have a strand from your mother, a strand from your father, and they want to add a third. What is that? The serpent seed? Is this one of the reasons we keep hearing about transgender and pronouns all the time? Okay, I mean, I hope I'm making myself clear. You know, it's quite a complicated thing to explain. This is just me musing over stuff. Like I said, I'm not claiming this or claiming that, but it's interesting, okay? So let's have a recap, okay? The theory is that the amount of genes per strand of DNA that they are claiming now is not true, okay? It's being covered up. And it's actually 72,000 per strand, like they said 20 years ago, which would mean a double helix strand is 144,000 in total. And they are trying to add a third strand to people's DNA. Maybe now, maybe in the future. And that would then take your genetic count to 216,000 genes per person. And if you multiply the mark of the beast in the Bible, the 600 times 60 times 6, you get that number, 216,000 exactly. Is the third strand the mark of the beast? And is it telling you in the Bible that people who don't get genetically altered and keep their double helix, their genetic code that was given to them by the Creator, which totals up to 144,000 genes per person, and that number, 144,000, is mentioned at the end of time in the Bible as the people who are saved. Are they saved because they kept their original genetic code and did not take the mark of the beast and allowed themselves to be genetically altered by getting a third strand? Is that what it's all about? Let us know what you think in the comments on this theory. Also, I couldn't help but notice that you remember the mosquitoes, the Bill Gates genetically engineered mosquitoes they released in Florida last year. Look how many they said they released. 144,000 genetically engineered mosquitoes. How strange. Here's another. 144,000 disposable masks to be donated to United Way's Facing Forward campaign. And there's more. It's a number they use a lot, especially with genetic stories. Are they trying to tell us something? Okay, so there you are. Let us know what you think in the comments. Once again, thanks for listening. Come and subscribe to hugotalks.com and I'll see you later.